This is the second part of our material on Aristotle's work, De Interpretatione. And in this work, we're going to focus on what he has to say about future contingents. These are future statements about particulars, something happening, something being the case. And the idea is that if every affirmation is true or false, so we have any given sentence, it's going to be true or false, then everything either is the case or is not the case. So a simple sentence like, it is pale, the contradictory would be, it is not pale, and one of them must be true and one of them must be false. So any given sentence and its contradiction fit into this relationship where one is true and the other must be false. The problem, though, is that if something is pale now, then previously it was true that it would be pale now. Now, that doesn't seem problematic on its own, but let's think this through. If it was always true that it would be pale now, then it is necessary that it is pale, right? So this idea of necessity is introduced when we're talking about the past, and the future from the past perspective would be the present. So things have to be the case. So this is true of every statement, so that everything will be of the case of necessity. Everything's going to be either true of necessity or false of necessity. So Aristotle considers how this would work with the idea of a sea battle. And so he imagines the potential sea battle that might occur tomorrow. And he says, if the sea battle will happen tomorrow, then it was always true that it will happen tomorrow. And that means it's necessary that it happen tomorrow. So we have an argument that we can construct building on these ideas. The battle will have to happen, or if it's true that it doesn't happen, of course, it will have to not happen. And if someone said 10,000 years ago that it will happen, and somebody else said 10,000 years ago that it will not happen, necessarily one of them was right and the other was wrong. That's the nature of the statements. So an implication now, the problem is that, well, wait a minute. If it's true that it happens tomorrow, it's of necessity. And nothing is by chance. Everything is by necessity. This applies to anything, we might say, not merely sea battles. And Aristotle does not like this consequence. He doesn't like the idea that everything is of necessity. And he raises the issue of deliberation. To deliberate is to believe that some things are contingent. Could be the case or could fail to be the case. So suppose you're deliberating about what to eat for dinner. You're deliberating about whether to eat pizza, right? To accept the above argument is to believe that nothing is contingent, so that when you deliberate, it's already true. If you will eat pizza, it's already true now. So it's necessary that you eat the pizza, right? And nothing is contingent. But when we're deliberating, we don't believe that. That's not what we believe. These are inconsistent beliefs. We believe that it could be true that we eat pizza, and it could also be false that we eat pizza. And that's true of all things that we deliberate about. Now, furthermore, it's also true that things come to be through deliberation. So Aristotle says, when we deliberate, we make things true. So as we deliberate whether or not to eat pizza, we make a decision, and the decision results in what happens, right? That it will come to be that we eat the pizza because we decided to do so. So Deliberation, just the fact that we deliberate, implies that some things are contingent. If we deliberate, we have to believe that some things are contingent. And Aristotle thinks this is reasonable, right? This is common sense. It's our common experience that we believe these things. And yet the argument concluded that nothing is contingent. Everything is necessity. So where did the argument go wrong, presuming it did? Now, Aristotle doesn't use the same ideas, terms, concepts that I'm using here. I'm borrowing from 20th century philosophy, 21st century philosophy, some tools that we have now, but Aristotle says the same things as I'm going to explain here, right? So the question is, where did the sea battle argument go wrong? Aristotle firmly is committed to the idea of deliberation, that we do deliberate and that we believe when we deliberate that things are contingent. And so he's assuming that there has to be something wrong with the sea battle argument. And the problem is the scope of the necessity operator. So what do we mean by that, right? That's kind of an odd phrase to sort out. All right, first of all, let's take the issue of scope. So let's apply it to something that we're all familiar with, a mathematical sentence. And we have a minus sign in front of this first sentence. We also have a minus sign that begins the second sentence. But in the first sentence, we have parentheses around 3 plus 5. And that tells us that the scope of the minus sign applies to what's within the parentheses. So negative 3 plus 5 equals a negative 8, right? But if you took the parentheses away, then the negation, the minus sign, would only apply to the 3, not the entirety of the 3 plus 5. And so negative 3 plus 5 equals 2, not minus 8, negative 8. Okay, so it's one thing to say that it is necessary that P implies P if we were to use that sentence. But that does not mean that it's necessary that P, right? We have to be careful about the scope of our concept of necessity. How much of the sentence does it apply to when we're using it? Just like how much of the sentence does it apply to when we're using the minus sign? So consider this situation. We'll have a simple sentence, Gus is sitting. So we have P that represents the sentence, Gus is sitting. We have the tilde that represents the contradiction of that. The negative P, not P, is going to be then Gus is not sitting. Now, we can use the box in front of a sentence to represent necessity. So the box can be read as, it is necessary that, right? And in this first case, we have, it is necessary that either P or not P. Now, this is a truth of logic with sentential logic or propositional logic. This is a basic truth when we're doing modal logic and using modal operators like the box of necessity. But it's one thing to say that it is necessary that P or not P, right? Where the necessity applies to the entirety of that claim. But that does not mean it is necessary that P, right? Nor does it mean that it is necessary that not P. Right? You can't separate these things out and say that the necessity applies to the individual parts, right? So necessarily P or not P, which is true, does not imply that necessarily P or necessarily not P. But that's the problem with the sea battle argument, right? So it's neither necessary that Gus is sitting, nor is it necessary that Gus is not sitting. It is true that it's necessary that either Gus is sitting or Gus is not sitting, right? The necessity applies to the entirety of the disjunction, but it does not apply to the components, the individual disjuncts. So we have a fallacy committed in the sea battle argument. The C-Battle argument committed the necessity scope fallacy, and it assumed that necessarily P or not P implies necessarily P or necessarily not P, right? Here, the C-Battle will happen tomorrow, right? Either it will or it won't. Okay, that's fine. That's of necessity. But that doesn't not mean that necessarily P or necessarily not P. It doesn't mean that one of them had to be the case, as the C-Battle argument stated. So that's the fallacy that is committed in the C-Battle argument. And we can apply it now to the topic of free will and deliberation. And in fact, Aristotle's argument about deliberation gives support for the contemporary version of libertarianism, this idea that, well, we just simply believe that one thing could come to be through our deliberation, and we believe that the contradictory claim could come to be as a result of our deliberation. So we actually believe that we have libertarian free will. But that's another story.